everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, author and writer about kind of all different things fitness and nutrition related, and lover of most things outdoors related, although not in the weather we've been having lately.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I am a registered kinesiologist and an endurance coach, and I don't know, I'm okay with it.
I've been really cold all weekend.
Well, you're getting used to Canada still, I guess.
You know, says the guy that was shivering at Pan Am's and had, I think, probably 10 different people come up to you and ask, "Aren't you Canadian?"
I am, but I do like to move. I don't like standing.
Yeah, we did have a very spectator-heavy weekend for us this weekend. I was at OFSA, which is Ontario's cross-country high school championship. I was there with the team I've been coaching this season, and, you know, the team had a great day. It was very chilly, very muddy, very mucky, but they performed really well. I was super proud of a bunch of them. All of them, really. And then the next day we were at the Pan American Championships of Cyclocross here in Midland.
Yeah, it was good.
Those races were super exciting.
We also watched a wedding.
Oh yeah, we did watch a wedding. That was not nearly as chilly.
But somewhat athletic. We did a lot of dancing.
That might have actually been our peak athletic performance over the weekend.
Yeah, I got in a run or two runs, which was good.
I did not, which was also good. I've been dealing with a little bit of a knee niggle, we'll call it. Not major pain, but just enough that I've, elected to keep it a little chill this week and let it heal on its own.
We've been working through it a bit.
Yeah, you've gotten to practice your NKT stuff. Peter's a kinesiologist, and
yeah, so we've been doing a bit of muscle testing and just some. Molly really just needs to do some sort of warm up usually, or some cool down.
I don't think that's accurate. I'd like to strenuously disagree with that, even though it's probably actually quite accurate, but. Been still doing my normal morning routine, yoga, core, all that jazz, and walking a fair bit. Just have toned down the hour to 90-minute runs.
And then what's going on with Shred Girls? There's been some exciting news.
Yeah, so anyone that's been, listening for the last bit knows that I have the Shred Girls series with the first book set to come out with Random House this spring. So the official launch date of that is May 7th, 2019. But the very exciting thing for right this second is that you can pre-order it now on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon, you can search for either my name, Molly Herford, or you can search Shred Girls or Shred Girls Lindsay's Joyride is the title of the first book. I'm so excited with how the illustrations look, how the cover looks. Obviously with the writing, but since I did that, I can't be quite as excited. It's sort of weird.
It's nice. And I just tweeted that from your newsletter, there's discount codes for Shred Girls Swag, which can tide people over till the May release of the book.
Yeah, if you want to find out those discount codes, you should head over to theoutdooredit.com and sign up for my newsletter there, where I tend to put a bunch of discount codes and other fun stuff, or go to the Shred Girls site and sign up for that newsletter. That one's going to have a discount code coming out pretty soon as well. So, yeah, all great options. Pre-orders would be awesome. The more pre-orders, the better the hype around the book is going to be, the more chance that it's going to reach a lot more, a bigger audience of not just people who are already invested in cycling and already care about it, but actually get to people who, maybe aren't at all interested in cycling and hopefully get them hooked.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely something that's just sort of appeals to young people, hopefully, right?
Exactly. All right. So who do we have on today?
So we have Luke Humphrey on the show today, who is both an accomplished coach and an accomplished marathon runner himself. So as an athlete, he's qualified for the Olympic trials twice already. His personal best is 2:14, which is quite fast.
Just in the
a
marathon.
Little fast. Yeah. And then as a coach, he's coached hundreds of athletes. He works along with the Hansen brothers, who are also quite popular in the marathon coaching world.
If I was a better sound editor, I would totally be playing Mbop in the background right now.
Well, I don't know if that's fair. They're probably sensitive to that, I guess. But, yeah, if we had better editing, I guess we could be like that. So they've written a couple books already that are quite quite well known in terms of like how do you do a marathon. These are the books you should read. So Hansons Method. And so this is sort of a follow-up to that called Hanson's First Marathon, which basically is going to take you, maybe if you haven't run much, and sort of what that process look like. And more commonly, if you've been a runner, maybe recreational, or you've been dabbling in sort of 5s, 10Ks, maybe the half marathon, this book's going to help you sort of deal with extending that fitness out longer, right? So you can sort of avoid injury and make sure that, you got the pacing and nutrition nailed, right? So we talk about a lot of those common pitfalls in injury and nutrition and pacing and too much too fast and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
So even if you're not like planning your first marathon for next year or something, you guys still talk about just running philosophy in general and, a lot of takeaways for someone who isn't necessarily just interested in a marathon, right?
Yeah, I think, this is sort of that coach to coach type episode. We have sort of a variety of different episodes we do. So this one's a little more theoretical even, or coach to coach, sort of back and forth on philosophy differences and, general practices versus more specific applications for, different people, and how he differs from me, or how you might approach two things differently. So it was quite an enjoyable talk for me as a coach, but then also as an athlete. I think, whatever you're doing, whether you're just cross training because the weather isn't great right now, or you want to try and get running, I think there's a lot of takeaways, even if you're not looking, at that marathon specifically, or if you're looking at something like you are, like the ultra marathons, right? There's probably something there for you as well.
Great. And then just a quick warning, our recording equipment missed the first about a minute of the talk. So.
Yeah, it should be okay. We've introduced you now to Luke, so you should be up to date, I think.
But don't be surprised that it jumps right into what Luke's been up to running-wise.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into it with Luke.
20 miles this week probably, so I'm still able to train pretty hard. I'll be 38 in April, so I'm trying to get one more trials qualifier, which means I'll be, I think, just under 40 at the next trial. So that would be my fourth Olympic trials in the marathon. So we'll see after that. But no, still hanging in there. But yeah, like I've been on the team since 2004, and still am technically on the team. So.
That's amazing. So, I mean, you have your own training, which I respect. I'm also sort of still going at it. Maybe not at Olympic trials sort of level. I mean, I'm in mountain biking, so I guess I could be, maybe I could call myself very long listed, but I don't know if that's true. But, and I think it does add a perspective. And the Brooks Distance Project, it's mostly working with high end runners, or do you have like a master's program as well?
We do actually have a couple masters in the program, but there's still, Dot's still running, 234, 235 in the marathon. So she's still very, very competitive. And then actually myself, like I said, I'll be 38 here pretty soon. And one of my teammates, Mike Morgan, he actually works for me on the coaching part. He'll be 39 in February. So we have a few people who are right on that edge of being in the masters, and a couple people who are still in the masters. But yeah, it's all basically Olympic level or Olympic trials level athletes. So, we're definitely the oldest on the team, but, like right now, I think we have a few guys that are, 23, 24. So, we definitely have the full end of the spectrum on the ages, but the level of competition is still the same for everybody. Where I come into play is, so basically, my story is 2006. Kevin and Keith have done clinics at the stores for forever, and I was finishing up my master's degree in exercise science, and their kids were getting to the age where they were doing a lot more stuff, and I think they wanted to just be more involved with their families, and said, "Hey, Luke, why don't you just take over the clinics for us, and we'll give you all the information. You just start presenting the clinic." So that's really how it started for me. So I was doing clinics at the stores for, people who wanted to run the Detroit Marathon in October. And so I would just start doing that. And then eventually a couple people said, "Hey, can you coach me individually?" This and that. And the next thing I knew, I was coaching individuals. So I started a LLC and I talked to Kevin and Keith, and they said I could use Hansons in the name. So it's just Hansons Coaching. And so, then that was over 12 years ago. So then it's grown significantly since then. But that's really, really how it started. So I'm working mostly with with recreational runners. But I'm working with, that's a full spectrum of people too. They're like, I'm coaching, a 49-year-old right now who's running 2:40 in the marathon, and I'm also coaching a guy who just wants to break 5 hours in the marathon. So I have a full spectrum, and I'm coaching a couple people on not in the Olympic project, but on the with that I'm personally coaching that are trying to qualify for the Olympic trials as well. So it's definitely a full spectrum of people. But we coach. Gosh, we coach 170 people at peak individually, and 160 of them are just people trying to get what they can out of the marathon. So it's definitely a full range of people.
Right. And within that, you're coaching all distances of people, or how many? What would, like, you're down to 5K, or you have a track program too, or what's the range on the distances?
A little bit. I would say just where we've made our name is the marathon, though. And so the vast majority of people are running a marathon. So we definitely do coach the other distances. But what we end up seeing a lot of times is people come for us for a marathon segment and they stay long term. And so we'll coach them to get them faster at shorter distances and then come back to the marathon and things like that. So we do coach all distances, but I think most people come to us originally for the marathon. That'd be pretty safe to say.
Right. What would it run? I'm curious. I have coaching business, so this is somewhat of a selfish question. But in your run clinics, like what type of form do those take? I mean, people could even come down. A lot of our listeners are, I would say in that East Coast sort of region, so you guys aren't far away. So what's a run clinic for a marathon look like? Is that one day, half a day, series of events, or what are we doing?
So typically what we would do, we've kind of we've actually grown so much from the online component that we've gotten away from the group stuff from the community standpoint. And that's honestly one of the things I'm trying to get back to in next year in 2019 is streamline some things online so I can go back to doing the community-based stuff, which is where, I just like building those relationships with local people that, want to run. And but when we first started, it was basically a program for the Detroit Marathon in October. So we'd start in mid-June, and it would just be a series of, so every Tuesday and Thursday we'd have group runs from one of the stores. Sundays we'd have group longer runs from one of our stores. We have a really great location for our Lake Orion store, which is a little further north of Rochester, but you can literally step out the door and hit dirt roads right away. And so we'd try to do a lot of the longer stuff out there. So it'd be basically you'd have 3 options for group runs during the week. And then we would do clinics like every other Wednesday or something like that, where we would just talk about different educational components. So the actual coaching would be more at the group runs. We'd do a clinic at one of the stores, we'd get pizza and beer or whatever, and do an hour-long talk about, it might be structuring your training. It might be maximizing recovery, how to implement strength training. It might be just on basic physiology and learning why you're doing certain workouts, nutrition stuff. And then we talk about taper, race day logistics. We'd try to cover everything that we could. We'd basically have a whole section of stuff. And basically what's in the book are things that we would cover from an educational standpoint at the clinics, and then we would just make sure we were available for group runs and things like that. And then the schedules that are in the book that's where those started. I mean, those schedules were the schedules that Kevin and Keith handed out 25 years ago. So it's all just kind of all packaged up now and in a nice paperback form now. So
right. Which is handy, right? Like you say, as you get more and more people having that sort of handbook for people to hopefully go through and read. They can sort of, even clients that are working with you, they can sort of use that so they understand the philosophy, right? They understand.
Absolutely. And it's actually kind of funny because, we get a lot of people individually coaching now, and we'll write them something custom. It's still the philosophy, but it's more custom to what they need. And they'll be like, well, this isn't in the book. It's like, well, but you wanted something custom, so if you could have saved yourself a lot of time and money by just using the book. But
Right.
but it is funny because a lot of people they it's interesting. I don't do a ton of signings and stuff like that, but we do go to a running store and somebody will bring a dog-eared copy of the book, and it's like all uh, indexed out, and it's all kind of there's underlined thing. I love it because then people are actually using it. So like when somebody and they'll be like embarrassed because they got this kind of ripped up book. And I'm like, no, that's great. I mean, they're using it. That's perfect. That's what it's for. So.
Yeah, exactly. And you're probably referring to the Hansons Marathon Method, which
Yeah,
is
the
that's
first one that
the
came out.
first book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it's definitely like I've heard that mentioned before, and I think it's for a lot of people, like you say, it's almost become similar to there's a Joe Friel's training Bible for cyclists, and he has a series of those books for mountain
Hmm.
bikers and stuff. And I think for a lot of people, it's this is sort of the system, right? And um, it works for a lot of people. Just
It does.
there's that you have to have a plan of some type, right? Some sort of progression to a certain thing.
Exactly. And in all honesty, is a lot of times just having a plan that you believe in is going to allow you to. It's really going to increase your chances to be successful. It's when a lot of times people don't like a plan. They don't. They've got in their head already that it's not going to work. Chances are it's probably not going to work just because of that mindset going into it. But yeah, I mean, I find people either absolutely love the system or they just look at it from afar and say nope, that's not for me, and which is fine. I mean, you can't be naive enough to think that you're going to be able to fit something for every single person, and you shouldn't have to. I mean, if you have something that you believe in, that's all you need, right? Some people are going to believe in it and some people aren't going to believe in it. But we have a Facebook group with 10,000 people in it, and most of those people have had great success with the plan. So, but that's not to say people haven't had great success with Hal Higdon or Jeff Galloway or
Right.
any of those people. So it really just depends on the person.
Yeah, for sure it does, right? And there's that intricacy, where people can't train on certain days, or they do end up with an injury, or coming in with an injury, or there's all sorts
Hmm.
of different snowflake type situations, but
Right.
but
Absolutely.
yeah, like you say, it's often sort of some variation on that system.
Hmm.
But it is funny. Have you did sort of mention that, but do you find that people think of you as this certain type of coach, a tempo coach, or this long slow distance versus high intensity, and then when you go to use high intensity, say if you were a long slow distance quote unquote coach, it's hard. It's funny how people sort of like pigeonhole you, and you're like, well, no, they're all sort of tools, right?
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we're mostly known. Oh, you're the 16-mile long run people. Like I can't just do 60. Everybody else says to do 20 miles, but it's like, well, and they get stuck on that. And that's when I was referring back when people just look at it from afar and they don't ever look at why it's 16 miles. Like what leads up to you doing that 16 miler at the end of the week? Like what were you doing the previous 6 days? What were you doing the previous 14 days? And that's really where the 16-mile comes from. And but people get stuck on, oh, you're just doing 16-mile long runs. Like, okay, yeah, but I would guarantee you that you're doing more mileage than most runners world programs or whatever you're looking at. I can guarantee, because honestly I ran into that problem when we wrote the first book. Is Velopress came in and said like, hey, we want to call this less is more. And I'm like, well, did you actually look at the schedule? Because you're running 60 miles a week. It's not like you're doing 30 miles a week and you're only, but that's where I think people get stuck. They focus on one aspect of what you're doing. And in reality, that one aspect is determined by all of the other things that you're doing. And that's where it's really important to look at the whole entire body of what you're actually getting in during the week and during, the entire segment.
Okay, I mean it begs the question then. Now I need to sort of know like why 16 miles? Like does that sort of correspond with a certain duration that where the sort of risk reward is lower or higher? Is that where you ended up with 16, or is there a story behind the 16? I guess is what I'm wondering.
Well, you talk to me, it's a different story than what if you talk to Kevin and Keith about
Right.
it. But
Sure.
Kevin's a great storyteller, and so he'd always, when I was listening to when he did the clinics, I would just kind of pick up on what he was saying. But basically, Kevin's version of it was, himself and Keith were putting the schedules together. So this would have been in probably the early '90s that they were putting these schedules together. And so Kevin's just flipping through all these books, and he had these Runners World UK versions of Runners World, and he's looking at the schedules, and they're like, well, they just peak out at 30K. 30K isn't 20 miles, so why are we doing 20 miles? And it just comes out, his version of it basically like 20 miles is a nice round version of a long run, right? So if you get to 20 miles, that's where you need to be. And it worked out well because, people hit the wall, they bonk it between, anywhere from 18 to 22 miles. So if you just make it a nice round 20 milers, like, oh, if you can do a 20 miler, you can be fine in the marathon. And that's kind of where it seemingly evolved here in the United States. But, you look overseas and all these other metric calendars, it's like, well, a lot of those schedules would only go to 30K because it's the same thing. It was a nice round number that was a long run that worked. And, that's it. And so where I came into it is I obviously believe what Kevin's saying, but where I come in on it is you look at things where, just a lot of like, free, schedules, you can get from Runner's World or wherever, you might peak out at 40 miles a week. And if you're doing a 20-mile long run, you're putting most of your emphasis on that single run, right? So if you're doing 40 miles and 20 of it's coming from one run, that only leaves you 20 miles for the rest of the week. So what are you doing the rest of the 6 weeks? Well, you don't have a lot of room to play with, right? So you're probably not doing a lot. And so what ends up happening is you recover for that 20 miler, and then you recover after that 20 miler, and now you're left with only a few days of training. So you're really not, to me, you're really not necessarily, you're not training, you're surviving from long run to long run because it takes up so much volume of what you're doing. And for most people, if you take a 4-hour marathoner, a 20-mile long run is going to take them well over 3 hours, which does become an issue because then once you get over 3 hours, 3.5 hours in that type of range, then you're really talking about you've dug a hole so deep you can talk about glycogen depletion, muscle damage, this and that, but you've created such a hole that you've dug yourself into on that one run that now you have to get back out of that hole. And so the only way to do that is to take 1, 2, 3 days where you're not really doing anything. And so then you're really limited on what you can do for training. So to me, it comes down to if you're doing those mega long runs where they're 50, 60% of your weekly volume, you're not training. You're simply surviving to cover the distance. So will you be able to do it? Absolutely. You'll be able to run a marathon doing it that way. But from my experience and really from people we've coached over the years, what they found is that we survived that first marathon, right? We survived it because we were able to survive the 20 milers. But they come to us and they're like, yeah, your training is hard and we hate you for 18 weeks. But then we feel so much better because we were able to do all this other balanced training and not just put all of our emphasis on the long run. And so that's really where it comes down to is if we scale back a little bit on the long run, increase the overall mileage a little bit, we can get so much more work done during the week so that by the time you get to that 16 miler, you're not fresh. You're already tired going into that 16 miler. So Kevin and Keith always say like that 16 miler isn't like doing the first 16 miles of a marathon. It's like doing the last 16 miles of a marathon because you're already fatigued going into it. And so that's where we get in. That's where we kind of separate ourselves from other people.
Yeah, that frequency piece often gets missed, right? And that's ultimately what you're talking about is how often can you train, right? And even how often can you train with quality. And
exactly.
I think you see that in a lot of sports, whether it's strength training or cycling's bad for it too. Everyone wants to do their 5-6 hour ride on the weekend, and it's like, 90-minute rides are pretty valuable in my mind. That's sort of my critical number is 90 minutes. And maybe on the weekend we're hitting like a 3-hour ride, but that's even for the elites. And then you'll see, the weekend warriors are trying to smash like a 6-hour ride on the weekend, and it's like I couldn't even imagine how tired you would be.
Right.
So it's similar, and I mean, you would have the same thing. Like, there are people, the very elite of the elite maybe can like absorb that, and there's the piece that their 16-mile run or 20-mile run isn't a 3-hour run, right?
Correct. Oh, absolutely. Right. And that's where you definitely have to, we put this in both books, the Hansons Marathon Method and the first marathon method. So honestly, the first marathon method will include basically everything from the previous books, but then also specific things for first time marathoners. But going back to the point yeah, I think, that's exactly it. You just keep that balance, and you keep that frequency of training, and you learn how to train. And then as a person who advances, like, so I have people who started off with just the book, and then their mileage really hasn't changed. But since they've done this, say the advanced plan for 3-4 times in a row, we can change some other variables on them because they've gotten faster. And so that we can shake that up a little bit for them, and we can individualize that for them a little bit. But the same philosophy will always stay true. But yeah, if you're running, take for instance, if we're doing a 20 miler, we're doing 100 miles a week. So in essence, our long run's only 20% of what our week is. Whereas for the advanced plan, it might be 25 to 30% of the weekly volume. So those percentages might change a little bit as you get faster and your mileage increases, but we can still get a lot of stuff done.
Awesome. Yeah. So this newest book is called The First Marathon Method. So why don't we dive into that? Like, who is this for? I mean, obviously someone who hasn't done a marathon, but how does someone know they're ready to do their first marathon?
That's a good, that's a good question. I think that your second part there, how do they know? That's where we're at a really weird, not really weird, but it's just a place in our marathoning history, I guess, where you're having so many people involved in the sport with no running background in particular. And I touch on stats a lot in the book where, you look back at the 70s, early 70s, runningusa.org has kept stats on this for decades, but you basically have 20,000 people, mostly men, running a marathon, and the average time was under 3 hours. And so you had a very select group of young men running fast. And now you look at it, in 2018, and you're looking at, on average for the last 5 years or so, 550 to 600,000 people just in the United States have run a marathon. And, the times have obviously decreased, and some of that's just because we're slower. Some of that's because the average age has grown. I think it was right around 30 in 1970, but now I think the average age is, late 30s, maybe early 40s. 50% of I think it's actually more women are participating than men now. I think it's like slightly more men than women. I think it's like 55-45. But the average male time is like 3:45. I think the average woman's time is right around 4 hours. So you've got more and more people involved in the sport, but more and more people who maybe didn't run in high school, maybe didn't run in college, they're just now in their mid 30s and want to take up running. And so this, everybody says you got to run a marathon. If you want to be, you want to be in that select pool where you got to run a marathon. And I think too, where things have changed is just with the charity stuff. Like, so many people just want to run to raise money for charity, which is great, but a lot of times those people are just starting from scratch, right? So to answer that question, it's tough. Like, I think anybody can, as long as they're healthy. It's more of a matter of don't decide 8 weeks before the marathon that you want to run a marathon. I think if you've never run, you've got to give yourself plenty of time to build up. But I think this book is really for all those people. It's for the person who has never run before and wants to start from scratch. We have something for you. The person who has done their local 5K and 10K, and this is a bucket list thing that they want to do is run a marathon. We've got a plan for you. We've got a plan for the person who is age group ace in the 5 and 10K, maybe run a half or something like that once in a while, but are really more competitive in the 5 and 10K, we've got a plan for you. There's really it's really anybody who's attempting to run their first marathon, we've got something for you. And honestly, too, I think people who've looked at our book, Hansons Marathon Method, they're pretty intimidated when they look at those schedules. It's 6 days a week of running. You're getting up to 50, 60 miles a week, even in the beginner plans. And I think most people who look at our beginner and advanced would say your beginner's more like an intermediate at least plan. And so a lot of people just get turned off right away from doing the plans because they look at it and they said, no way. There's no way I can dedicate this amount of time, this amount of effort into running the marathon. So, and I looked at it, I said, okay, I'll give you that. And so I said 6 days a week for, and just knowing and doing this for 12 years now and seeing the people who are running the marathons that are using our plans, I can still get that person, say the mom who's, staying at home with her 4 kids and running on the treadmill, or the business person who's traveling 5 days a week, or whatever the case is. I get that it's really hard to fit those 6 days a week in. So I took it and I said, okay, how can we back this off just a little bit, introduce them into learning how to train for a marathon, and then move on from there, right? So maybe the next time they go around, then they jump up to the Hansons Marathon Method. So in essence, even if you've run a marathon and you're like, man, I'm really intimidated by that schedule, the original schedules, I can jump into one of these. These seem much more sensible for me, where I'm at and what I can do. And so even if you've run a marathon, we probably have a plan that's in there. It's 5 days a week. It's going to get up to about 40 to 50 miles a week, which I think for a marathon is where you need to be. If you look at it from that standpoint, at 50 miles a week, you're still not even twice the race distance that you're going to run, right? So you're spreading that out over 7 days. Whereas you look at, argument I make too, and this is an old Dr. Martin quote, was like, he was basically saying, well, if you're running 20 miles a week and you're racing a 5K, you're still running 7 times more than your race distance over the week. So you're getting a lot of volume compared to what you're actually racing. Whereas the marathon, if you're running 30 miles a week, you're barely getting 1 times your race distance for the entire week that you're going to run on one day. So I do think there's a certain amount of volume you have to have in order to be somewhat successful and make it attainable to actually be, not necessarily comfortable is probably the wrong word, but to be sustainable for the marathon.
Right. And I wonder too, you guys also have a half marathon method book for anyone who's, maybe the distance is going to be an issue, but is there someone, if these early runners who are still struggling to get, the volume up to, finishing a 5K, there's obviously like years, would you say years of progress there, just even from like a soft tissue neuromuscular adaptation standpoint, right? Like you hate to turn anyone away, but there's some people just like, the best idea here is going to be to look at this over a course of years.
Yeah, I think in terms of adaptation, yeah, absolutely. You're going to adapt for a long time. And then over time, where you adapt is going to change as well. But I think, I'm just thinking back, probably the most popular training plan out there for true beginning marathoners is probably Jeff Galloway. The run walk, start at scratch, and then 78 week. I'm just kidding, but it seems his schedule seems like it's forever. Like it seems like it's like a 40-week schedule, but he literally will take you from 0 to a marathon in about a year. And I think that's attainable. I think that where I see most people run into problems is, so the cardiovascular system will adapt really quick, right? If you're consistently getting out there 3 or 4 times a week, you're running 30 minutes at a time, you're going to see improvement right away. But where the problem usually occurs is that bone, tendon, and ligament are way behind on that. So your heart's going to be more fit than your tibia, right? And so what happens is people feel really good. They start increasing the pace, or they start increasing the amount of time, or they start increasing the number of days they're running, or they do all 3 at once, which is probably more likely. They just start doing all 3 more at the same time. and they never allow the structural system to come along with the cardiovascular system, and then they get the shin splints. They get the stress fractures. They get the the plantar fasciitis. They get the Achilles tendonitis. All those things, those will flare up pretty quick because they weren't given enough time to adapt. So I agree. I think there's somewhere in the middle where it's not. I don't think it's going to take you something like 2 or 3 years to build up to be able to run a marathon. But I think that you can't just rush into it. I think, ideally, if somebody's not running at all, I would say 6 months is probably your bare minimum. But ideally, what I would like to do if I were coaching you is I'd like to, like you said, I'd like to get you to where you can run 30 minutes at a time. And then let's talk about a 5K. And then let's talk about a 10K. And then let's talk about a half marathon. And then let's talk about a full marathon, right? But in reality, people are going to want to run a marathon in 6 months. So I think you can. I think you have to be very careful with it. Is it the best? Probably not. Yeah, I would maybe say a year or so would be better. But that's not really the world we live in right now. So I try to always blend with what we should do with what is probably going to happen.
Right, and that's certainly the reality, right? Is trying to help people, do the best and understand. There's a lot of athleticism and pride to be taken in a well-run 5K, right? You can hurt really badly over 400 meters, or even 100 meters would be perhaps the, not many people are great at running for 100. But like as you say, someone's always going to ask you if you've ever run a marathon, or in triathlon, have you ever done an Ironman, right? But
right.
If you watch it, an Olympic distance or sprint triathlon, it's tremendously athletic and exciting, and
absolutely.
Most people cannot coordinate that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And all the elements of the sport are there, right? Once you're, and it's odd because that's also the progression that I'm trying to think. Like Alexi Pappas, I think, just sort of made her Chicago debut after being a short distance, right? And that tends to be how the elites do it, right? Is they tend to come from the short.
And if you look at a lot of their debuts, they don't go well at all. Right. Because in reality, so like, let me use Bernard Lagat as an example. So he's 42 or 43, and he's making his marathon debut this weekend in New York. And so you see a guy like that who was at one time one of the fastest 1,500 people in the world, like second fastest in the world. And so he can literally run a 3:45 mile. So he looks at it and he's like, okay, well, you want me to run 5-minute pace that's going to be a jog, and I don't think they understand, like, you have to extrapolate that out to 26 miles and just like simple things like fueling that you don't have to think about in a 5K, a mile, a 10K. You don't have to think about those things. But for the marathon, if you don't think about those things, it's going to make or break your race, right? Like you might feel great, and all of a sudden you're going to just hit that wall. You're going to wonder what the heck happened. You're going to be like, it's going to be and the thing is, it's a whole different pain and discomfort than going out too hard in a 5K, right? It's not that lung burning, air quote, lactic acid burn that you feel in a 5K. It's the, oh my God, this isn't right. Like this, something's not right. I physically cannot go, and I don't think people know, if you've never felt that, it can be incredibly scary, right? And so I think, and it's just like a whole new shock to the system. Like, you see it, an Ironman is a perfect, that is the true, like, how you manage your fueling is going to dictate how you manage your race for a lot of that, right? So if you don't do that right, it's going to, you could have the fastest bike in the world, but if you don't have the engine to power it, it's not going to matter, right? And so I don't think those things are thought about a lot of times when those shorter distance elite athletes, I think they get a little cocky on it, and they just think that they're going to go out and run 2:09 their first marathon and say, yeah, I've seen a lot of people think that and not do it.
Yeah. And I don't know if running, has this quite the same. Like we have power curves basically in cycling. So like your sprinter would have a very steep curve. So at the short end of the curve, they'd have very high power, or sorry, at the left side of the curve, they'd have a very high power output for like 10 seconds, say,
Right.
or 20 seconds. But if you take that curve out to 3 hours, it drops off very quickly. Whereas your time trialist or your triathlon athlete would be the most classic. They'd have a very flat curve, so like no sprint, but then they hold, a
They can
high
go forever.
percentage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if running. I guess running you could chart the exact same pace thing over duration, right?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I think, I think what you'd see, and a lot of times is especially if you take a more shorter race person who's more experienced with 5Ks and 10Ks or just better at that. What you'll see is, they'll start out very fast and they can hold that for a little while, but then when it goes bad, it's going to go bad really quick, and it's going to get really bad. And, there's not like there's not like a gradual drop off. It's like when it goes, it just goes. And you could be running. You take you take an elite woman marathoner who's running 5:45 a mile, go, and then all of a sudden it's like 6:30s, and then it's like 7:30s. I mean, it gets really bad really quick, and there's like, so that's when people say, "Oh, I'm going to put time in the bank in the first half." It's like, okay, that's fine that you have 30 seconds ahead of schedule, but when you get to 22 and you're losing 3 minutes a mile, how's that time in the bank working for you? And it's a hard relation. And if you've never, and again, it's
never seen it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You almost have to experience once to really kind of grasp the concept. Like, okay, yes, I do have, even at 30 seconds, it seems minute, but you're riding that fine line of being able to maintain a pace or not maintain a pace. And so you always want to be just on the conservative side of maintaining that pace and then not falling off at the end. Because when, if you're a little bit ahead of that pace, it's just enough where when it goes, it just goes. And and the thing is, there's no coming back from that. Once it's gone, it doesn't matter what you do. It's going to be gone.
Yeah. So switching gears a bit then, I want to, you guys have a great way, I think, of breaking out sort of your, I guess it's in some ways the philosophy, but the classification of workouts. I thought it was fairly eloquent. There's a couple nice graphics in the book. But the one I'm talking about here is you sort of have your total weekly volume, and that's made up of easy mileage and what you guys call SOS workouts.
Yep.
So I wonder if you could just briefly run us through sort of like when people are looking at, we've talked a lot here about training and a little, we got down some rabbit holes, but all really good, and I think talks about what a marathon is. But maybe when people are thinking, okay, this is this other level of intensity, maybe we've talked about frequency and we've talked about weekly volume or daily volume. So then how is that made up? You have your easy mileage and your SOS workouts.
Yeah. So it's easy and SOS, which so easy is self-explanatory. It's just easy paced running, conversational paced running. I will say this is where a lot of people, and this is experienced marathoners as well, make their biggest mistakes, that they want to run these too hard. Easy running is really about, especially for your first marathon, it's really about just putting time on your feet, right? And it's not. We always give a range with easy runs, and so obviously we have a lot of competitive people, and they think that if they're at the fast end of that easy range all the time, that's going to be better. But the truth is, anywhere in that range is fine. So if you're feeling like crap one day, slow those easy paces down. If you feel good, that's fine. Run a little bit faster on the easy day. Just stay within the range. So you have a little bit of freedom on there. But I always tell people you gotta listen to your body on these, and you can't run your easy runs too fast all the time, especially early in a training segment, just because that will catch up to you later in the training segment. But that's easy runs. That's like, roughly 1.5 to 3 minutes slower than your marathon pace per mile. And then you have the SOS, which is made up of speed, which there's some differences there, strength, and then tempo. And so speed, I always prefer to use 10K pace this could be current, or this could be, or if you've never run a 10K, you plug your time, you plug your goal race time into a calculator, and we actually have a calculator on our site, hansonscoachingservices.com. You can just plug in your goal time. It'll give you all the paces that you need to be hitting. But either way, I usually like to use 10K pace. One, we're not trying to necessarily get faster at the 5K or 10K right now. It's really just more about balance and getting some faster work in. And it's really kind of preparing you to learn how to do intervals if you've never done them before, or repeats before if you've never done them before. And so it's kind of more of teaching you how to do a repeat type of workout. And it's getting you faster relative to the distance you're running. So 10K is significantly faster than the marathon. So it's relative to that standpoint. And that will be 3 miles worth of work. So a lot of times it's 12 by 400 meters, or 8 by 600 meters, 6 by 800, all the way up to 3 times a mile. And that will be the first part of the marathon training plan. And then you move on later in the weeks. We shift more to more marathon specific work, and that's when you go from speed to strength workouts, which is, a lot of people try to equate this with half marathon, so more like lactate threshold type of stuff. In reality, it's slower than that. It's 10 seconds per mile faster than marathon pace. So you see that on paper, and you're like, that's not that fast, right? So and that's another mistake people do. They'll cheat that down more closer to half marathon pace. So which might be 20 seconds per mile faster than marathon pace, or 30 seconds, whatever the case is. But this is 6 miles worth of work. So it's 6 by 1, 4 times a mile and a half, 3 times 2, 2 times 3. I do a 3-2-1, but it's 6 miles worth of work at that faster pace. And that's really like the last 6-8 weeks of the marathon segment. That's more marathon specific. Is dealing a little bit with accumulating lactic acid, but it's more about running a significant amount of time at a faster pace. And then the last section is tempo runs, which is marathon pace. Our tempos are always marathon pace, and those will go, they'll start at like 4 miles and build to 10 miles. In the first marathon, I break those up sometimes. I'll do like maybe like a 2 times 4 miles or something like that, where I'll break it up a little bit, but those are always at marathon pace. And that's kind of one of our other things, is we do a lot of work at marathon pace throughout the entire training plan, because we want you to learn from day one, basically, how that pace feels, and how that pace feels over if you're training in the summer, how does that pace feel in the heat? If you're training in the winter, how does that pace feel in the cold? This and that. So, but those are the 3 main SOS, and then kind of a bridge type of thing would be the long run. The long run for the first time marathoners is probably just going to be at their easy run pace, right? Because I'm just more worried about building their general endurance. But the fact is, you're going to probably be out there for 2 to 3 hours. So it makes it much more difficult than a regular easy run. So the long run's kind of in the gray zone there. But those are the 5 components of the marathon plan, and that's pretty simple.
That's awesome, and it's getting more specific sort of as the event approaches. So you're starting to, obviously approach that distance and more time at that intended pace.
Yep.
And I think that time at intended pace makes a lot of sense, right? And we were just talking about, people falling apart because they weren't, used to pacing or fueling or running that long at that quote unquote fast or specific pace, right? So it seems like that's, when people think about goal setting or pacing for an event, when those questions arise, it's often, they've skipped that portion of the book or the training plan they're following, right? They haven't, really paid attention in that build up, the training, which should prepare them for race day.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So along with that, like the specificity of training, the increased specificity of training, is there other concepts as far as setting goals for race day for these more beginner marathoners, the first-time marathoners?
Yeah, and we talk. It's for the first-time marathoners. You really don't have kind of a benchmark, right? So, if you're taking somebody who has already run a marathon and they run 4:30, well, we can set a goal of 4:15, something like that. But for the first timers, it is a little bit tougher. So we'll actually have a series of questions to ask people in the book, and a lot of the purpose of that is to force them to take a look at themselves and say, like, okay, here's my strengths, here's my weaknesses. And then what you can do is you can take, like, say you've run a 5K. You can take your 5K, plug it into a calculator, a race equivalency calculator, and it's, let's say it says you're capable of running 4 hours. Okay, so then we know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and if we know that you're probably going to be better at shorter distances, we can say, well, 4 hours is really kind of like the best of the best. So let's take a step back from there a little bit. And so a little bit of it's kind of trial and error. You might set some, so like using that 4 hour example, we might say, okay, well, let's train for like 4:10 and just see what happens, because we want this to be a positive experience for them. And so we might say 4:10, and then we get into workouts. And since they're doing tempos from day one, or pretty much day one, or they're doing a lot of marathon pace stuff, we're going to know pretty quick how aggressive that is. And so our goal is to always say a final time goal by the time you start the strength workouts. Because by then you're in the last 6 to 8 weeks of a plan for the most part, and that's going to be the most race specific. So that's the absolute latest you want to be completely dialed into a time. So I'll admit, I mean, the first 4 to 6 weeks might be a little bit of trial and error. You doing, just doing the paces that you kind of originally start, and then going from there. I will say, and that's the beauty of working with a coach, right? And you probably know this too, right? So that if you're working with somebody, you can look at their log, right? And you can ask them follow-up questions. So they might say, "Oh, the tempo went fine." Okay, what does fine mean? Were you able to, if you would have had to have gone, 20 more minutes at that pace, could you have? Or were you completely spent by the end of that? What was the intensity level of that? There's a lot of things you can ask yourself to say, okay, was it truly what it should have been, or was I just basically selling my soul to hit this workout? If somebody's selling their soul to hit a workout, then that might be a little bit aggressive, especially for a marathon pace workout. If you're talking about a speed workout, that's fine, because that's not what we're training for, right? So if that's a hard workout, that's going to be a hard workout. It's no big deal. But the tempo run, like, you should never feel like, oh my God, that was it, right? There's no way I could go any further. I don't think you should get to the end of a 10-mile tempo run and say, man, I could go 16 more miles at that pace, but I should be able to say, I could go 2 or 3 more miles at that pace, no problem. I could do that. Because you're in the heart of your training, you're in the biggest mileage, the biggest volume, the most intensity, the hardest work's being done, the long runs are being run. You're tired, right? And that's the whole point of the plan. We're trying to make you tired, but we're trying to not make you so tired that you get hurt. And so if you're overdoing it on all your workouts, then it might be time to say, okay, this goal is probably a little aggressive. We can back off. On the other hand, if you're like, man, this is nothing, maybe you do bump it up. But for me, I'm always more conservative on that stuff, because so if somebody comes to me with a 4-hour goal, and then 4 weeks later they're like, well, workouts are going really well, let's try for 3:45. It's like, well, but here's the deal. If we go to 3:45 and now it's too much, are you going to be so overtrained that you don't even run the 4-hour goal, which was the original goal? So you always have to be, you always have to be careful on that. So like a lot of times with that, I might just split the difference and say, let's train for like 3:53 to 3:55, which still sets them up to run well. And if it even falls apart a little bit, they can still run under 4 hours. But if the training's still pretty good, they're going to set themselves up to run under 3:50 by being a little undertrained than being overcooked. That's always the goal. You don't want to go into a race. If you go into a race overcooked, you're done from the start. But if you go in a little bit underdone, you still actually have a chance to run faster than what you originally thought you could run, because you're a little bit more fresh, but you've still done the volume and the intensity that you were assigned to, right? So, but yeah, I've never seen anybody be so exhausted in training and then have a really good race. Like, they're tired, but they're not like, dragging themselves out of bed every morning just to get to work or whatever the case is. So there's a fine line you have to work on there.
That's perfect. Yeah. And this can be a quick answer here on the next one, but is there strength training as part of this first marathon, or do you feel like, the running itself is going to take care of a lot of that and we only have so much time, or where are you at with strength training for early marathoners?
Yeah, it's chicken and egg type of thing. Like I'm a believer in the strength training, but on the other hand, I know that if I can just get a person to run 40 miles a week, they're going to do pretty well. So I talk about it. I definitely talk about it, but I kind of leave it up to the person. Like if they're already overwhelmed with the training, I don't want to throw that on top of it and make it even more complicated for them. I want, I believe very much so in the fact you just keep things simple, because the more complicated you make them, the less likely a person's going to adhere to it, right? Their longevity in it's not going to be as good. So I kind of leave that up to the individual. I definitely talk about it, and I think it's an important concept, but I guess it would depend on the person too. If somebody's really just looking to say, hey, all I really want to do is run 5 hours, raise money for, the American Cancer Society or whatever they're doing, and I literally have no intention of ever doing this again, I'm not gonna hound that person to do a strength training program. Whatever. I get it. But if somebody's looking to stay in the sport, to me, learning those things is integral into developing a plan and learning how to train overall, and take that with you, years down the road.
Yes, for sure. Now, obviously running has, components of strength. We can say, there's some impact, some jumping.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use terrain at all as part of that? Like an uphill, I guess, or off-road. You did talk about grass, sort of soccer field type stuff. Is there a component we could call strength training even, or resistance as part of the actual running in your philosophy, especially for this first-time marathoner?
I think so, because a lot of, one thing we try to push on it, especially with your tempo runs, is if you're going to run a hilly course, then you should probably try to do your tempos on a hilly run, right? So we do try to break it up. And even I'll go as far as saying with the speed, I don't even like a lot of my athletes doing their workouts on the track, their speed workouts on the track. I say, go out and do them on your regular routes where you have some variation in terrain. Because our goal isn't necessarily to get fast. It's just getting fast relative to the distance of the marathon. And so, yeah, there definitely is. There's definitely a lot of different things you can do. And then if you really wanted to, you could throw in things like strides or do those fast twitch types of things to make up for some of those components. But I think a lot of times, going back to it, you're already asking a person to run more than they've ever run in their life. Do we add this to it? I don't know if I know the answer to that, because obviously if they're stronger, they're going to be able to handle the mileage more. But if they are already running more mileage, do they have time to do the strength? And then where do you start? Where do you end? How do you blend it all together? And so a lot of times that just really depends on the individual.
Right. Yeah. And so often, some people, it might be, a specific warm-up drill,
Mm-hmm.
Some sort of mobility thing, if there's an underlying injury, lower leg, if someone's already gotten into having, some plantar fasciitis, there might be some homework to do.
Right.
We could put under that or in that bucket of strength training, but might not be barbell squats in the gym necessarily.
Oh, absolutely. Like I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's You Can Run Pain Free by Brad Beer. He's right. He's a physio guy out of New Zealand. Great routine. It's like 10 to 15 minutes long. People want to get started. That's a beautiful thing to start with. I mean, it's super simple. I mean, he's got a YouTube video. Just look it up on YouTube. You can follow right along. I mean, and that'll do wonders for most people. You don't have to go to a gym or do it. You just take 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You start out with doing that twice a week. That's a great foundation thing to start with, and then you can build on top of that if you so decide. But I mean, a lot of that stuff I do. It's just basic stuff that we kind of neglect, and it's going to make you more resilient. But it's not gonna make or break you. And it's something I'll literally stand on my stairs by our living room and watch TV while I'm doing this. So and do the routine. So you can definitely do some simple things that will make you much stronger overall.
Okay, perfect. And then I think my last question then that I had here, I don't want to keep you too long, we're getting close to the hour, was just, when someone's in those last week or two, again, we're not peaking for the Olympics, the volume is not so high. So is there anything specific, in those last week or two to get ready for that big event? Like what are the big rocks for being ready for first marathon?
I think a lot of people will read online like how much you have to cut out of your last couple weeks, and people look at our program like, oh my gosh, you don't even have a taper, but they're looking at it from one aspect where we're just looking at the mileage. Big believers in being pretty consistent. So if you're running 5 days a week, we're probably still going to run 5 days a week. We'll scale that mileage back, and we'll scale the intensity back a little bit. But you really want to stay pretty consistent. And it's just like when you start running, right? You don't want to build too fast too soon. It's the same thing with taper. You don't want to cut too much too soon. And I think when people cut all those components out of their program, that's when they really start feeling sluggish. They start getting this sickness. Kevin's got a great line. He's like, if you're used to getting 6 hours of sleep a night and then all of a sudden you're getting 12 hours of sleep a night, do you feel good? Most of the time you don't. You feel pretty sluggish, right? That next day you feel sluggish because you're not used to getting that much sleep. And it's kind of the same thing with the taper. If you just cut everything back so much and you're resting so much that you really kind of feel sluggish and you really feel worse than if you would just keep that consistency a little bit. So that's a big thing. And then the other thing too is I think you have to be really careful with nutrition, because what I see a lot of times is, if you're running the most mileage you've ever run, you're probably eating the most calories you've ever run. And then all of a sudden you scale that back by 25% and then 50% the next week, and you're still eating like you were running 40 50 miles a week, and now you're running 30 miles a week. You got to be careful because you could put on quite a few pounds pretty quick with doing that. And so you really want to keep kind of that rate, that air quotes race weight that you're at. So you have to be careful with that, and we talk about that in the book too, where I scale back on eating to the day, eating to what you've done for the day, and then going into your carbo load the last few days. But you could do that. Like the last couple of days, if you put a couple pounds on, it's no big deal because it's all the glycogen that you need to store. But if you're 2 weeks out and you start putting on 4 or 5 pounds, for most people, that's probably not necessarily good. That's not the weight you want to be putting on, because it's probably not muscle mass. It's probably other stuff. So just want to be careful with that.
Yeah, definitely some art with keeping that eating to the day, but that's a good point. Like, a lot of times people think so much about, again, just that volume, and there's the components of intensity and whatnot as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have problems with people being nervous about the amount of intensity? You said you dropped it a bit, but I'll see some people, they're nervous and they want to just cram all the training in, which is one problem. But then also you'll see people who basically don't want to do anything in the week of the marathon, and it's like, well, the actual point of a taper is that you're sharp and you're ready to run.
Right.
You're familiar with running, but we've cut out some of that fatigue. But it's certainly not to lay in bed and become lazy.
Right. I think honestly, the people who are already overtrained are the people who freak out, right? They're the ones that are like, oh my gosh, I need to rest everything because they're already done and they already know they're done. So they're the ones that probably struggle the most with it. But overall, I'd say most people are pretty good. The biggest thing I always get though is like, I'll have them run, 3 miles or 30 minutes, whatever's less, the day before the marathon, and a lot of people will freak out with that. But the way I look at it is, one, the freshness thing. It's actually going to make you feel a little bit better. But that's the thing that bothers me is they'll complain about the 30-minute run, but they'll go spend 4 hours in the expo on their feet. Right. But I'm like, okay, no. So if you run the 30 minutes and you get your stuff from the expo and get back to your hotel, you'll be fine. And so a lot of times people want to switch out, but I set that up because usually it's 2 days before that they're traveling. So I'll just give them that day off, get a nice little shakeout jog the next morning, and then and then you're well on your way. So, but a lot of times I'll get some flack on that, like, I'm not running the day before the marathon. It's like, okay, whatever you want.
Right. Yeah, so much of it is that lifestyle piece, right? It's certainly the clients I work with, so much of the peak is actually just pulling out the, as much of the work stress and, maybe even getting to the race a day early so you can, be in bed and, not that the kids are in the way, but, decrease some of the running around with the kids and stuff like that, right? And that's sort of the working person's peak is, often very much, I guess, ahead or more important than any sort of running or lack of running you can do.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is a key component. I mean, having a supportive family is huge, and if it's important for you and important for your spouse, hopefully people have that support from them where the spouse or whoever will be willing to take on a little bit more for you those last 4 or 5 days and just kind of let you settle in. But I know a lot of my my business folks will actually just plan on taking some vacation like 4 days before so that they can just fly out early and get out there, because then they can actually get some sleep or not be hassled all the time. But so it definitely makes a big difference.
Yeah. All right. Well, like I say, I don't want to keep you too long, Luke, but that's awesome. It's been super fun talking to you, and I think some really practical things people can take here as they get running, whether that's just for the off season or if they're sort of building towards goals. And we'll link to all your websites and Twitters and the links you've provided today, and then also certainly to your book. Was there anything you want to leave people with, or something you definitely want them to check out?
No, I think, definitely check out the website, and, we have a lot of stuff about everything we do, but a lot of blog posts that we talk about. Some of the things we talked about briefly here, we go pretty in depth with. So, I think if you want to run a marathon and you want to learn how to train, then our book's going to be a really good fit for you. If you're looking just to do a one-off, we'll definitely be there for you. But I would say my goal with my coaching and the books and everything was really to teach people how to learn how to train and take it with them as they go. Because so many people that we work with, they say, I only want to run one marathon, and that was 10 marathons ago. So hopefully the bug will bite you too. And, because, obviously as a runner, I want the sport to grow. And I think, this is a good intro into that, this is basically an abbreviated version of what our elites do. I think it's a good intro into, learning how to train for a marathon and do it well, and then perform off of a marathon, not just survive a marathon. So I guess that's my sales pitch. So
Awesome. So the book is Hanson's First Marathon, website at hansonscoachingservices.com. And Luke, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete podcast. You can check out my stuff over at theoutdooredit.com or by following me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford. And you can check out Peter's coaching, training plans, blogs, all that fun stuff over at smartathlete.ca or by following him on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Glassford. And if you want to support this show and other awesome podcasts, please check out wideanglepodium.com for show info, other podcasts, bonus content, and to become a donating member so you can get all of that rad behind the scenes content and help keep shows like this on the air. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the information that we're bringing to you every single week, do us a solid and pop into iTunes to leave us a rating and review. It takes you about 2 seconds. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your phone, and it really helps us out. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.